question is, does social capital help individuals reduce their vulnerability and increase their resilience and therefore support adaptation? The answer is not always. In some cases, it might actually help, but in other cases, and a specific study that we've done recently shows that this is open to question. The literature suggests that by increasing social capital, therefore by helping people form networks with people of similar social identities, or actually from different groups, they can be supported further in terms of improving their social well-being, their links to other people, and therefore their expectations and programs for the future. But some research that we've done recently with elderly people in Norwich and in London and their social contacts demonstrates that actually this is quite difficult. People were interviewed about their notions of being able to cope with the weather. Specifically, we were interested in heat stress and their vulnerability to it, and how that relationship with other people might help them deal with their circumstances. And most elderly that we interviewed actually said that sure, heat stress was a particular event, but that they didn't feel particularly vulnerable to it. They said, sure, we will have to deal with it in some way when it affects us, but actually other people might be more vulnerable. For example, babies, people with illnesses, and so on. Some elderly also felt that if they were affected by a heat event, they would be able to cope with it reasonably well, or if not, at that point, they would call on help from others. And that obviously implies that they are relying on external help when they're already affected, rather than anticipating having to need that help. We also spoke to people that are social contacts of the elderly that we interviewed, like daughters, grandsons, and so on, which have a close contact with these elderly people and who might support them in some way. Now, they felt really quite concerned about intruding on the elderly's independence, and they quite rightly valued people's independence. On the other hand, also, they had limited information about what the impacts of heat stress would be on these elderly, but also they felt that they couldn't necessarily challenge what elderly people felt and how they coped in these situations. So overall, we found that in this case, the bonding social capital that elderly people had with their contacts limited instead of promoting their resilience and therefore potential adaptation to climate change. In the case of heat stress events, they were actually coping with it in the best way possible and not really proactively trying to engage with the issue and change in a more favourable way. So our research overall shows that although social capital might actually be a constituting force of societies, and in some cases might be really helpful to enable people to engage, but also to anticipate particularly difficult events and make them more able to deal with them in an anticipatory way, it doesn't necessarily mean that it will be. And therefore, we suggested in this work that the idea of social capital and different forms of social capital should be explored in much more detail in relation to resilience and adaptation.